Regression testing is a type of testing that is done to test existing functionality or code which was tested before but could have been impacted by a new change. This can be done manually, or mostly it can be done through automation. And this is usually done when new code is introduced, meaning there's probably a new feature added, a new functionality, or maybe when there were multiple fixes done to the code and you want to go back and just recheck some of the past scenarios or retest some of the scenarios that you tested before which they were working that you have in your regression scope. Also, regression testing is done when there's an environment change, meaning when there's an issue with an existing environment and the code is moving to a more stable environment, or when the code is getting promoted through the life cycle, meaning when it goes from the dev environment to the IST environment, then it goes into the UAT environment, or when it gets promoted into production. Usually you will have a set of test cases that will you do regression on to make sure that nothing else is broken, which was not intended to be directly impacted. Also, many times companies will decide to do regression testing when there are performance issues. This will allow them to identify all the areas, all the programs that are being impacted by the performance. And of course, this is usually done on waterfall methodologies and highly recommended on agile methodologies, which is highly done nowadays. Now, there are different types of regression testing. I'm not going to cover all of them. Depending on where you are, which company you work for, they may refer to them differently. But most of the most common ones are unit testing, progressive testing, test selection, retest all testing, complete testing, and prioritization of testing. Just to cover a few of them, for example, progressive testing, you want to do some of the regression testing on some of the new functionalities. Sometimes it may not be impacted directly, or the functionality may not be impacted directly, but you want to see that all the features from the current functionality are still working as expected. Test selection, when you have a good understanding of what is impacted, you may want to go ahead and pick several test cases just to run a quick regression testing, or sometimes you want to run a more extensive regression testing, and you will have an idea of what selections or what test cases you want to run. Now, retest all testing, usually you go and you retest the whole scope of regression, and a lot of times this is done when you already have the test cases automated. Of course, if you're doing manual testing, this will require a lot of time, a lot of resources, and many times it's not feasible to do a complete regression testing all the time. Another one is prioritization testing. This one is when you know you have a very important module or a very important application that must work 100% all the time in production. You may want to focus on these particular areas, and you may have other areas that may be impacted, but they are not as important as the one that you have in production. So usually you will prioritize what test suite, what regression test cases you want to run. And of course, like everything else, there's usually challenges. And some of the challenges that you're going to encounter during regression testing is that you may not be aware of all the changes, all the new programs, especially if you're working for a large corporation. This is really hard to track, but if you have a good team, you have the right resources, a lot of times you're going to be able to communicate with other teams, communicate with other test managers to understand what changes they're doing to make sure they're not impacting the current functionalities that you are in charge or the current functionality programs that you are responsible for testing. And many times deciding how much is enough, and this usually will come with experience. After running regression testing release after release, you will have a better understanding what is the most important parts, how many test cases you should run. And a lot of times you want to reduce the redundancy. You don't want to keep running regression test cases that you never find bugs. You want to, instead of using that time and energy, you want to use it on other test cases that you tend to find bugs release after release. And you want to focus on the problematic areas. Also, maintaining data may be a problem. As you grow in your regression test suite, you're going to notice that you're going to need a lot more data. Sometimes you may use the same data in two different test cases. If the data gets corrupted, then sometimes you may be in trouble. So just managing and maintaining the data can also require a lot of time and energy, which can be done if you have a good plan in place. And also with automation regression testing, maintaining the scripts is probably one of the biggest problems. Many times the development team may change certain features, may change certain tags, may change certain things in the code that will impact the regression test scripts. And in return, now the test team has to go back and redo the test scripts. Something that can cause a lot of waste of time. A lot of times that when you're supposed to hit the floor running, you have to stop and go back and do maintenance first before you can run your automated scripts. And of course, you don't want to confuse regression testing with retesting. Retesting usually is used when you have to go back and run the same test case within the same release. Meaning if you find a bug, you have to go back and retest the bug. So you have to retest the test case. Or a lot of times they will ask you to replicate the bug. So you have to go back and retest the same test case to replicate the bug. So don't confuse retesting with regression testing. And these were just my thoughts on regression testing. I know it's going to be different for everybody depending on where you work. Regression testing may be a little bit different, but high level, this is how I understand it. But let me know in the comment section below, what do you think? Do you agree with it? What else do you want to add for regression testing? And remember, I'm trying to document all my progress as a QA tester as I'm moving into an automation role. So make sure you join the community. Don't forget to hit the like button, and I'll see you on the next one.